You probably think the most beautiful towns in the US are already famous, already crowded, already all over your feed. When you look at long-term patterns in geography, preservation, and tourism behavior, what consistently shows up is the opposite. The most stunning places tend to stay quiet, avoid overdevelopment, and never chase attention. Honestly, that's what surprised me while researching this. Beauty doesn't disappear. It just hides in towns most people overlook. The next 10 prove that, starting with one so remote, it feels unreal. Number 10. Sitka, Alaska. Number 10 is Sitka, Alaska, a town that challenges the idea that the most beautiful places have to be easy to reach. Sitka sits on Baranof Island, reachable only by air or sea. And when you look at long-term settlement patterns, towns this isolated usually struggle to survive. Sitka didn't. What consistently shows up in places like this is a balance between remoteness and cultural depth. Mountains rise straight from the Pacific, often wrapped in fog, while bald eagles circle above daily life. Over time, Sitka became a working community, not a staged destination. Downtown blends art galleries, local bookshops, and seafood spots shaped by the surrounding waters. The Alaska Raptor Center and Castle Hill reflect how wildlife and history are woven into everyday routines. Honestly, what surprised me is how normal this beauty feels once you're there. If this feels too remote, the next town proves gorgeous places can exist almost anywhere. Number 9. Mount Dora, Florida. Number 9 is Mount Dora, Florida, a town that quietly rewrites what people expect beauty in Florida to look like. When you look at long-term patterns, towns that stay desirable over time tend to slow development, protect access to nature, and prioritize walkability. And Mount Dora fits that formula almost perfectly. Instead of beaches and high-rises, life here centers on freshwater lakes, shaded streets, and a calm that feels intentional. What consistently shows up in places like this is livability over spectacle. Boating, biking, and sunset lake views replace crowds and noise. Historic buildings still anchor downtown, including a century-old inn that reflects careful preservation rather than nostalgia. Here's the weird part. Wildlife like alligators exists nearby, yet the town feels serene, not chaotic. Honestly, what surprised me is how balanced Mount Dora feels. If this calm caught you off guard, the next town does the opposite by looking nothing like America at all. Number 8. Carmel by the Sea, California. Number 8 is Carmel by the Sea, California, a town that looks like it was designed to reject modern expectations on purpose. When you look at long-term preservation patterns, what consistently shows up in places like this is intentional resistance to becoming too convenient or too commercial. Carmel has no chain restaurants, no street addresses, and no street lights. Choices made early on to keep the town from feeling overbuilt. Over time, that decision shaped a place that feels storybook rather than suburban. White sand beaches sit just steps from cottage-style homes, while narrow streets wind past galleries and locally owned restaurants that all feel distinct. What surprised me while researching Carmel is how strictly those original rules are still respected. The town treats charm like infrastructure. Scenic areas like nearby coastal viewpoints and elevated trails reinforce how closely nature and design are tied together here. The weird part is how normal this feels to locals. Beauty isn't marketed, it's maintained. If this feels deliberately different, the next town proves history alone can quietly carry a place for centuries. Number 7. Sag Harbor, New York. Number 7 is Sag Harbor, New York. A town that proves beauty doesn't fade when history is allowed to evolve naturally. When you look at long-term coastal town patterns, what consistently shows up is that places built around working harbors age with depth rather than decay. And Sag Harbor fits that pattern exactly. Founded nearly 3 centuries ago, it once ranked just behind New York City in economic importance during the height of the whaling era. And that influence still shapes the town's identity. Preserved homes, brick buildings, and a walkable waterfront create a layered atmosphere that feels lived in, not staged. Over time, museums and cultural spaces grew around that history, allowing the past to blend into daily life instead of becoming a tourist prop. What surprised me while researching Sag Harbor is how calm it feels despite its legacy. The weird part is how seamlessly modern routines coexist with streets that have existed for generations. Why these towns stay gorgeous? You're probably thinking this can't be random. When you look at long-term patterns, what consistently shows up is that towns protecting nature and limiting overbuilding keep their character while others lose it. Honestly, this is where the list shifts, because the next towns don't just look beautiful, they quietly outperform expectations, starting with one almost everyone underestimates. Number 6. Canyon, Texas. Number 6 is Canyon, Texas, a town that quietly reframes what beauty looks like in the middle of the country. When you look at long-term geographic patterns, what consistently shows up is that towns bordering protected landscapes tend to hold their visual identity longer. And Canyon sits right beside one of the most dramatic canyon systems in the region. Vast open skies, layered rock formations, and surrounding preserves give the area a scale that feels cinematic rather than flat. Over time, Canyon shaped its character around preservation and education, anchored by one of the largest historical museums in the state, which grounds the town in documented history instead of spectacle. Outdoor access blends into daily life through nearby parks, trails, and wildlife areas. Honestly, what surprised me is how calm Canyon feels despite the enormity around it. The weird part is how quickly the open space resets your sense of scale. If this quiet grandeur caught you off guard, the next town proves small places can feel just as powerful. Number 5. Wellsboro, Pennsylvania. Number 5 is Wellsboro, Pennsylvania, a town that feels preserved rather than renovated. When you look at long-term patterns in towns bordering protected wilderness, what consistently shows up is that slow growth keeps places visually intact, and Wellsboro follows that path. Founded as a trading post, it retained Victorian architecture and historic gas lamps that still light the streets, giving the town a timeless rhythm. Over time, Wellsboro became known as the gateway to a massive forested region anchored by the Pennsylvania Grand Canyon, where deep gorges and dense tree cover create scenery that feels unexpectedly vast. Seasonal shifts reshape daily life, with winter sports giving way to hiking, cycling, and bird watching as conditions change. Honestly, what surprised me while researching Wellsboro is how calm it remains despite steady interest. The weird part is how quiet beauty can feel this dramatic. If this felt like nature doing the heavy lifting, the next town shows how the coast creates its own magic. Number 4. Brunswick, Georgia. Number 4 is Brunswick, Georgia, a coastal town where beauty comes from history that never left. When you look at long-term coastal town patterns, what consistently shows up is that places built around working waterfronts age with more depth than resort towns, and Brunswick fits that pattern. Known for generations as a center of shrimping and fishing, the town grew alongside the water instead of replacing it. Historic districts, old civic buildings, and a still operating theater give downtown a lived-in feel. Massive live oak trees line the streets, including one that has stood for centuries and anchors local folklore. Honestly, what surprised me is how natural it all feels. The weird part is how little Brunswick tries to impress anyone. If this coastal calm resonated, the next town puts nature front and center. Number 3. Gatlinburg, Tennessee. Number 3 is Gatlinburg, Tennessee, a town where nature refuses to stay in the background. When you look at long-term patterns in gateway towns, what consistently shows up is that places bordering major protected landscapes develop a constant tension between everyday life and non-stop scenery. And Gatlinburg lives inside that tension. Sitting directly against the Great Smoky Mountains, the town feels wrapped in forests, ridgelines, and mist that changes the mood hour by hour. Over time, Gatlinburg evolved into a place where outdoor access shapes everything, from elevated viewpoints to attractions built to showcase scale rather than hide it. What surprised me while researching Gatlinburg is how immersive it feels. Mountains don't frame the town. They press right up against it. The weird part is how quickly the scenery stops feeling like a vacation and starts feeling like normal life. If this feels intense, the next town shifts the experience by trading mountains for the sea without losing any character. Number 2. Gloucester, Massachusetts. Number 2 is Gloucester, Massachusetts, a town where the ocean isn't a backdrop. It's the reason everything exists. When you look at long-term patterns in coastal communities, what consistently shows up is that working ports with deep cultural roots age with authenticity rather than polish. And Gloucester has that in layers. One of the oldest seaports in the country, this town grew around fishing, shipbuilding, and art. And over time, those worlds never separated. The harbor stays active. Historic homes cling to rocky shorelines, and an art scene runs quietly year-round instead of switching on for visitors. Museums, galleries, and preserved estates tell the story without turning the town into a theme. What surprised me while researching Gloucester is how alive it feels outside peak season. The weird part is how often locals spot whales right from shore, turning ordinary days into something cinematic. Beauty here isn't staged or seasonal. It's working, weathered, and constant. If this feels grounded, the next town raises the altitude and changes everything in a single step. Number 1. Breckenridge, Colorado. Number 1 is Breckenridge, Colorado, a town that consistently rises to the top when you look at long-term patterns in mountain communities that manage to balance beauty, access, and energy without losing their soul. What consistently shows up in places like this is layered appeal. Breckenridge sits high in the Rockies, surrounded by dramatic peaks that dominate the skyline in every direction. Yet the town itself remains walkable, active, and visually intact. Over time, it evolved from a historic mining settlement into a year-round mountain hub where outdoor life shapes daily routines rather than seasonal marketing. Ski terrain spills directly from the mountains into town, while warmer months reveal alpine trails, rivers, and open space that never feel staged. What surprised me while researching Breckenridge is how seamlessly infrastructure blends into scenery. Free local transportation keeps movement simple. Historic Main Street stays alive with events, and nightlife exists without overpowering the landscape. The weird part is how complete it feels. Breckenridge doesn't lean on one feature to stay beautiful. It stacks nature, history, culture, and access in a way that quietly outperforms almost everywhere else. This is the town people assume must exist somewhere else, until they realize it's been here the entire time. When you look at long-term patterns, what consistently shows up is that the most beautiful towns aren't trying to be seen. They stay quiet, unchanged, and overlooked. The beauty was always there. You just weren't looking for it.